Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our pre-Tisha B'Av evening of preparation. And I'm delighted to welcome everyone to our YouTube channel. And the fact that we find ourselves speaking on YouTube and we've had to rejig the arrangements for tonight is, as we're all aware, because of the fact that there was an anti-Semitic rant on social media, which in turn remained unchecked for several hours by Twitter, and therefore it led to Jewish organizations and groups collaborating, coming together, and therefore deciding that we should replace the silence of the Twitter organization with the silence of us walking out. And therefore there has been a walkout for 48 hours of major Jewish organizations and leaders so that we will not be writing or appearing on Twitter, Facebook, and the like. And that all comes, in fact, the fact that, you know, when we speak about anti-Semitism and we think about these type of things, that all comes from exile, from the situation that we find ourselves in. We are just a couple of days away. It'll be tomorrow night. Wednesday night will be Tisha B'Av. It's the saddest night of the year. And the question which is often asked, and we have touched on it before, is, you know, we're not a sentimental nation. We're a very positive nation, forward-looking nation. Does it make sense for us, a great nation, to mourn still over some bricks and mortar cement? You know, why don't we rebuild it? Why is it that we still find ourselves sitting on the floor and mourning again and again? And our sages tell us that any generation in which the temple has not been rebuilt, then it is tantamount to the temple being destroyed in that particular generation. In other words, our sages are telling us that we were not worthy, or it looks like, since the temple has not been rebuilt yet. And if it's not rebuilt by Tisha B'Av, it will mean that this year, once again, we were not worthy of that temple being rebuilt in our time. And therefore, our sages tell us, it must be that we are still guilty, still suffering from the same malady as destroyed the temple. So therefore, if we find ourselves in the same or similar situation to Jews, our people for the last 2,000 years, we have to wonder, what is it? Why is it that we are in the same situation? What is it that we need to do to change the situation? So many problems in the world, so much anti-Semitism, persecution for minorities, there's discrimination, bigotry, hatred, suffering, and all of that comes from the exile that we find ourselves in. So we have to wonder what it is that has gone wrong. And we know that from statements in the Talmud that the reason why we are in exile was not because that we didn't daven enough, not because we didn't learn enough, but the second temple, as opposed to the first temple, the second temple was destroyed simply because that there was sinat chinam, there was mindless hatred, that Jews did not get along with other Jews. Can you believe that? Yes, sadly, we can believe that. And it's all too familiar, the story of different factions and fractions and disagreements and political points and articles in newspapers that lambast and criticize and stigmatize different segments of the community. Sadly, it's hardly a week that we don't go by when we cannot pick up a newspaper or read an article where there isn't some group that pits itself against another group. It's exceptionally upsetting, it's harmful to our nation, and it's not the way we should be. So therefore, rather than going back, on Tisha B'Av we'll go back and we'll see about the story, and we'll try and figure out the story of Tisha B'Av and some of the facts about Tisha B'Av itself and all the tragedies that befell our nation. Again, just a reminder Tisha B'Av is not just about the destruction of two temples 2,000 years ago, but it is the day that is emblematic of all the suffering of our people across the millennia. So pogroms, Tach V'Tat, the Crusades, the Holocaust, every single tragedy, every single terrorist attack, we mourn that loss of life when it comes to Tisha B'Av. So therefore, if it is that the temple was destroyed because we couldn't get along, because there was enmity and jealousy and mindless hatred, therefore our rabbis tell us, how do we put things right? Very simply, it's that we have to have love between our fellow Jew, right? If it was mindless hatred between different segments of the Jewish community that destroyed the temple, then it must be that it's love and fraternity and brotherhood that is going to rebuild and end this painful exile that we find ourselves in. So let us consider a few points about brotherhood, fraternity, about loving your neighbor as yourself. Are we really there? Do we really love each other in the way that we should? Let's have a look at a few wise statements and ideas that we find from our rabbis, and then perhaps we can put the pieces of the jigsaw together and understand where we want to get to, where we need to be on a daily basis. And hopefully through doing that, we'll have some idea of how we can put the pieces back together and be in a better place for hopefully rebuilding the Jewish people and for rebuilding the temple speedily in our days. But just as an aside, you know, I can't read anymore on a daily basis the news in Israel. And I'm not talking about terrorist attacks. Of course, that is exceptionally painful. But within Israel, the inner fighting, the hatred, the venom that is spewed from the various factions between Jews and Jews, Haredim and non-Haredim, modern Orthodox, non-modern Orthodox, the left and the right, Sephardi and Ashkenazi, Teimani, Mizrahi, Hasidim and non-Hasidim, Misnagdim, Americans and the French and the Sephardi, Ethiopians and the Russians. So many different types of Jews that should create the most beautiful tapestry, the most majestic masterpiece that has ever been seen and created in history. And yet, a nation that is the envy of so many other nations in its ingenuity, in its innovation, in the fact that we are the startup nation, yet we seem to keep starting up with each other. We can't get along. It's painful. It's painful to see it, to see the pictures of the police dragging away from people. It takes us back and reminds us of a dark era from the time of the Holocaust. And then conversely, to see from people that are throwing stones or throwing things at the police that are trying to do their job is equally painful. So how do we change this? How do we make things better? And if you think I'm just speaking about an Israel phenomenon, regrettably, I am not. Because one only has to think, and I'll end my rant with this and get on with some learning. You only have to think about our own country. And I hear it time and again that when we see incidents or we hear things about people in Stamford Hill or people that are more religious or less religious, everyone tuts and everyone gets upset and looks down at other people and other groups. Or when they are asked to help another group, they say that's not my type of people. But we are all one nation, and it shouldn't take a Holocaust to remind us that we are seen by our enemies and seen by the world outside as one nation. We should see it for ourselves. So now I've had a rant. Let me now carry on with what we were meant to do this evening. So we know that there were a couple of incidents in the Torah relating to jealousy. Think about the Torah. The beginning, the whole book of Genesis, Bereshit, was a group of people that didn't get along, right? You had, from the outset, you had Cain and Abel, Adam and Chava's two sons that didn't get along. Cain kills Abel out of jealousy. Then God comes looking for him. What's his response? No remorse. He says, am I my brother's keeper? Right? And then we have Abraham has two sons, Isaac and Esau. Do Isaac and Ishmael, do they get along? No. Jacob and Esau, the sons of Isaac, do they get along? No. It's only when we have Jacob as 12 sons, then we have a future. But that didn't necessarily start out that way. We know that the 12 tribes didn't get along at the outset. There was tremendous jealousy and enmity between Joseph and his brothers. And in fact, we find that the brothers plotted to kill Joseph. They sold him into slavery down to Egypt. And it was only after the brothers came down in the famine, after over 20 years of separation, that they managed to piece things back together. What was Joseph's response when he was sent by his father? He said, Es achai anochi mavakesh, I am looking for my brothers. We may wonder what's the difference between the situation with Cain and Abel, where there was tremendous jealousy between the brothers, and the situation between Joseph and his brothers. Also tremendous jealousy. They also tried to kill him. And the answer is that despite the fact that there was jealousy in both counts, there is a fundamental difference. Cain didn't want Hevel to exist. He wanted everything that he had. Between the brothers and Joseph, there was tremendous misunderstandings and misgivings about position in terms of the roles that they would play, in terms of the contribution that they would make to the Jewish people. But it was once they were able to understand deeply the respective positions that each one had, then all the misunderstandings were cleared up. And that's why Joseph says that deep down, I am looking for my brother. I don't understand him, but I'm looking for him. I'm looking to find my brother. And that is the approach that I think we have to have when it comes to Tisha B'Av and the year as a whole. We don't understand. We have so much mishigasim. I can barely understand of myself, let alone try and understand anyone else who's Jewish, right? We're all schizophrenics. We're all over the place. We've got chips on both shoulders. That's a well-balanced Jew. We've said it time and again. But the point is, what is our attitude? What is our approach? Are we looking to try to understand my brothers and my sisters, my fellow Jew, right? Or is that we've pulled up the drawbridge and we're not interested? We've reached certain conclusions, and that's the way we see other types of Jews for all time. So that is the first point. It's interesting to note that two of the greatest thorns in the thighs of the Jewish people were two people called Eldad and Medad. Called Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu were in Egypt with the Jewish people, and in fact, there were 4 incidents which the Torah tells us about them, and each one they were renegades, troublemakers. They made huge problems for the Jewish people. And we're told that they were the two that wanted to stay behind. They didn't want to leave Egypt. And yet, unbelievably so, we find that they seem to miraculously have caught up with the Jewish people when we were in Egypt, when we were in the desert. If they stayed in Egypt and they didn't leave Egypt with the Jewish people, right? Imagine. These were two guys that decided we don't want to have anything to do with the Jewish people. We're not following their God into the desert. We'll stay with Pharaoh. So how comes we find that slightly further on in the story, they have caught up with the Jewish people? And I can prove it to you, because we find first instance where they were troublemakers was that they were the ones that Moshe intervened. He sees 2 Jews are fighting and he asked them, why is it that you're fighting amongst each other? Stop this fighting. And then they say, are you going to kill us the way you killed that Egyptian? So they made problems for Moshe. Moshe had to flee. They were disparaging and making remarks and slandering Moshe. The second incident in which they made trouble for the Jewish people is that we know that there was a rule of thumb that when there was manna in the desert, the Jews were not allowed to keep it overnight. They had to have faith that the next day there would be a new portion. What did they do? They were the two that left over their portion, that didn't believe in God, that didn't trust in God. The third incident is that we're told after the incident with the spies, the 12 spies that came to spy out the land, 10 of the 12 came back with a bad report. And then what was the response? There were two voices that said, let's go back to Egypt. It was better in Egypt. Forget God. Let's get out of this desert. Let's go back to Egypt. That was Nadav and Abihu. And the fourth incident was that Korach, when he was looking to rebel against Moshe and Aaron, who did he take on board? Who were his allies? Dasan and Aviram. Dasan and Aviram. Sorry, not Nadav and Abihu. We're talking about Dasan and Aviram. So Dasan and Aviram, to be clear, Dasan and Aviram, 4 incidents. They were the traitors, the thorns in the side of the Jewish people. And yet, somehow, they miraculously seem to have been saved. Why would God miraculously save them? How did they end up in the desert when all the others that were wicked, we know, were killed in the plague of darkness and were left behind in Egypt? And somehow, we know that they journeyed with Pharaoh into the desert to chase after the Jewish people after they had left. 3 days after the Jewish people are left into the wilderness, they told Pharaoh, let's go after the Jewish people. They went after. And we know that Pharaoh and Egyptians were drowned. What happened to Dasan and Abiram? So we know that they were not drowned. But in fact, a miracle occurred, our sages tell us, and miraculously the sea split once again. Let's get it clear. The Jewish people as a whole, as an entity, have gone through the sea. It split for them. The Jewish people go through. Then the Egyptians chase after them. When the Egyptians are in the water, the sea comes over them. It comes back to its original place and they are destroyed. Now, Dasan and Abiram still are alive. And we know that they came through and ended up with the Jewish people in the desert. How did they get there? Our sages tell us that the sea split just for them. What merit were these two wicked, Rashoim, renegades, traitors, despicable people that were atheists, that didn't believe in God, that made problems for Moshe and for the Jewish people? Why did they deserve to be saved? And it's astounding, this idea, and it casts a new light on the story and the importance of our love towards our fellow Jew. And the story goes that in Egypt, Pharaoh had a system. He wanted to systematically wipe out the Jewish people, an all familiar story. And he had taskmasters that were placed over them. But like in Germany, like in the Holocaust, where they had kapos, which were Jewish policemen that had to be the guards, the supervisors, to ensure that the Jews behaved, Pharaoh also did. And Pharaoh had a rule that if the Jews did not meet the targets, they did not create enough bricks, they did not do enough work in any given day, the Jewish taskmasters were beaten. They took the beating on behalf of the Jewish people. And so it was that after Moshe went to see Pharaoh and asked for the Jewish people, let my nation go, Pharaoh said no. He said, I'm going to double the quota. I'm going to halve the resources you're not going to have. You're going to have to make your own bricks. You're going to have to make your own resources. And as a result, when Moshe and Aaron came out, they were approached by Dasan and Abiram. Dasan and Abiram said to them, what have you done, Moshe and Aaron? Don't you realize that this is going to be literally off our backs? And so it was that as the quotas were not fulfilled, Dasan and Abiram had to shoulder the blows for the Jewish people. They were the ones that shielded the Jewish people from the blows. In other words, what comes out of this is a phenomenal idea that should blow our minds. Were they wicked? Yes. Were they traitors? Did they believe in God? No. So what merit did they have? You know what merit they had? That they had a deep love for their fellow Jew, their brothers and their sisters. And the pain of a Jewish person was their pain. When they saw the Jews that weren't managing to meet the targets, to meet the quotas, they took the blows on their backs. And in that merit, they deserved, despite their despicable behavior, despite the fact that they undermined Moshe's leadership, despite the fact that they didn't believe in God, they were atheists, they still deserved to be saved because they cared so deeply and they made tremendous self-sacrifices to save and help other Jewish people. It's an astounding thought about the importance and significance of looking out for our fellow Jew. And that's what Joseph meant. I don't understand them. Es achai anochi mevakesh. My brothers I'm looking for them not just in a physical sense, but I'm looking psychologically, emotionally. I want to understand them. I don't understand them. There's tremendous tension between us, but I'm looking. I know they're my brothers. That's the approach that we have to have. I don't get them. They look different to me, these other Jews. They dress differently. They've got different perspectives. I don't understand it. They use their hands more than we use our hands. They don't park the way we park. They don't eat the way we eat. But yet, I'm looking to understand them. I want to try and get into their psyche. And I want them to get into my psyche. Let's talk. Let's respect our differences. Love what we have in common and respect the differences that we have. It's a fundamental idea. There's an astonishing Tosfos. Tosfos is one of the commentators in the Talmud. And he asked the following question. The question was asked to King Solomon. We know that the firstborn in the Torah is given a double portion. The firstborn male was given a double portion in the inheritance of the parents. Father passed on, and the firstborn son would get a double portion. That's what the Torah tells us. Now, ask the Tosfos, what would happen if an individual had two heads? Would they get a double Yerusha? In other words, imagine one child had two heads, right? It's possible, right? Siamese twins, they could have two heads, right? So conjoined twins, would that person, that entity, have a double portion because they have two heads or not? So King Solomon said that what you need to do to see whether it is one entity, whether they should get a double portion or not, is you should blindfold one of the heads. And then he suggests that you should pour boiling hot water on the other head. Pour hot water on the other one. And if the other head that's blindfolded, that doesn't know what's happening, if it screams and feels the pain of the other head, then you know that it's really one entity and therefore should get a double portion. Okay? So whether they get one portion or two portions would depend on this. In other words, are we one entity or two entities? The point that is being made by King Solomon in this answer, and that is discussed in our Talmudic sources, is it's a question for us as a Jewish people. We are meant to be one entity, just with different heads, different perspectives, different mindsets, different characters. That's the way we are. We are one entity. That's the way the sources describe the Jewish people, with different heads, like these conjoined twins. And the question is, when one head is hurt, if one head is feeling pain, do the others feel it as well? We're meant to feel the pain when there's another Jew who's suffering. Maybe different to us, with a different perspective, right? We Jews can even argue with ourselves. We never even agree with ourselves, right? What was it that Golda Meir said? And the Jewish people are a nation that refused to take yes as an answer. So I guess that is the approach that we are meant to have. And in fact, it goes further. There is a story that is told about a father and a son, and they had a farm, and they were very, very poor, and it was very, very cold. And they only had one coat. So the question is, who should have the coat? So initially, father said, I'm very old, I'm 88 years old, I want to have the coat. I need it because I'm so frail. The son says, listen, Dad, you stay at home. I go out into the fields, I've got to work to support everyone. If I go out in the winter in the snow, I'm going to freeze to death. I need the coat. And they were arguing backwards and forwards. And they went to the Rav, and the Rav said, after thinking long and hard, he said, you know what? I think that person, the younger man, who's going out, who's in the snow, who's in the freezing cold, he's risking his life for the family, he should get the coat. So they go off, he's very happy. And all of a sudden, as they're walking back, the son, who's now got the coat, sees that the father is shivering as he walks. And he says, "Dad, I realize I made a terrible mistake. I was thinking not with my conscience, but with my mind, not with my heart. You should have the coat." And the father says, "No, I've been thinking about it. You are the one who goes out, risks your life, who sustains us, supports us. You should have the coat." And they were arguing backwards and forwards, and eventually they went back to the Rav for a second din Torah, a second halachic decision in the Beis Din. And they said to the Rav, "Listen, we've got the same question, but with reverse opinions. Both of us believe that the other one should have the coat." And you know what the Rav said? The Rav listened to both of them arguing that the other one should have the coat. And the Rav says, "I just remembered, I have a spare old coat." Rav goes to the wardrobe and pulls out that old coat that he has in his wardrobe, and he gives it to them. So now that they both have coats. And the young man thinks for a second, the younger son, and he says, "Why is it that now you are prepared, you now thought about giving us your coat? Why is it you didn't think about giving us the coat before, which would have solved the argument when we were both arguing that each of us should have the coat?" And there's a tremendous deep psychological, emotional lesson here. Listen to what was said. The Rav says that it was only when I heard each of you arguing that the other one should have the coat that my subconscious made me feel that I had a coat and I should give that coat. It didn't come, there was no emotion inside me. There was no feeling. It didn't cross my mind. But when I saw that each of you cared for each other, all of a sudden into my mind came that thought that I've got an old coat and that each of you should have that coat, should have a coat of your own. So the question, that is the thing, that when we put ourselves in a situation where we show care and consideration for each other, by osmosis, it rubs off on other people. And that is the point that I'm trying to make through this story. Once the Rav was in this room with both of them trying to give the coat to each other rather than take it for themselves, it rubbed off on him. And all of a sudden, something was sparked in him that made him remember, oh my goodness, I actually have a coat that I can give these people. And therefore, we may wonder and think we're inadequate. What difference can we make if I'm kind? And maybe we are kind to other people. But through creating a more caring environment and encouraging others to follow suit, then that is something that has a domino effect. And I think throughout the COVID, it is something that we have seen in our community in particular, and certainly in society as a whole. And I think that is perhaps one of the main points that we don't want to lose from COVID. As much as we want life to go back to normal, we don't want it to go back completely to normal. To be a cold world where people don't think about their neighbors, about people that are vulnerable or lonely or living on their own across the road, and all of a sudden, when they see it on a WhatsApp or they see it all of a sudden they become aware of people that they drove by day in, day out as we led such hectic lives. But as we were forced to slow life down, we were able to think and to consider about the lives of other people. So we are meant to see each other as one entity. And in fact, we find with Jacob that he had a dream, a vision, we know, of a ladder going up to heaven. And we know that he laid down that particular night to have that dream, to have that vision, which was a vision of exile, or the future of the Jewish people, the exile that we are still in. And he took 12 stones and placed them around his head for protection. And at the end of this vision of angels going up and down, and represented the exile of Rome, of Greece, of Babylon, those 12 stones became one. And the Maharal and others suggest that it symbolizes and signifies the secret to our survival and our redemption from exile. And that was that the 12 stones, Rashi says, were arguing. Each one, of course, this isn't to be taken literally, each one wanted to place their head to be the stone under the head of the righteous Jacob. And at the end of it, they weren't fighting because they had become, miraculously, God made them into one, and that resolved the argument. They were all under the head of Jacob. And the question the Maharal asks is, how did that help? How did that solve the problem? Because Jacob could only place his head under one part of the stone. The other parts of the stone may have been ancillary, may have been supportive, but they wasn't directly under the head of Jacob. And the answer, he says, is so profound. He says that when we become truly one, when you become one, then it doesn't matter which part of the stone Jacob's head was on. They were all in it together. They're unified. A unified entity is all one. There is no distinction, no differentiation. And that is the place that we are meant to arrive at. It's difficult. And in fact, Rav Shimon Shkop and others wonder how we can do it. How do you become one? At the end of the day, I am I and you. How can I love another person like myself? I will never be you. I know you're relieved to hear that. But how do we become someone else? And the answer is, the only way is it depends how we see ourselves. If we see ourselves as just from our head to our toes, then you're right. We can never love another person as ourselves because we see ourselves just from head to toe. But if it is that we start to see those around us as an extension of ourselves, then all of a sudden our self becomes bigger. And as we expand ourselves, it's possible to start really loving other people and to not be able to differentiate between the other parts of us because we're all like that rock under one head. And in fact, we find that Rav Aryeh Levin, the great rabbi, Rav of Jerusalem, he was renowned for the care and concern he had for the Haganah and for those that were in Israel pre-Palestine, in the Palestinian area in the British Mandate. And in fact, his wife had an ailment towards the end of her life, and they went to the doctor together, and they were renowned for having a very special marriage. And Rav Aryeh Levin, when the doctor asked the wife, the Rebbetzin, what's wrong with you, Rebbetzin? And Rav Aryeh Levin, without missing a beat, said, my wife's leg is hurting us. That is what we are meant to achieve in terms of life, in terms of our relationships, that there is no differentiation and distinction between my arm and your arm. You're just an extension of me, a seamless extension of me. We're all meant to be one. We're all meant to be in this together. It's not a marriage of convenience. It's not just coming together when there is a cause or when there is an anti-Semitic incident or when we need to club together for our institutions or for our establishments. It's about recognizing that we are really one. Our enemies have recognized that we are one. It's time that we started to recognize and to realize that we are one. One of the most strange things, and I'll conclude with this, is that we say that every mitzvah we do, we're meant to do with the right side. The right side is considered the stronger side traditionally. Some people it's the left side, but generally the right side is the stronger side. So the question that is often asked is, if the right side is the stronger side, why is it our hearts are on the left-hand side, right? Remember, when it comes to Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, we bang our left-hand side where traditionally we see the heart as. Why is the heart not on the right side? And one of the rabbinic sort of thinkers, he said a beautiful idea, it's very cute. And he said, in reality, what is the purpose of the heart? The heart is the seat of the passions and the emotions and the feelings. And therefore, my heart is really there to be able to feel love for someone else. And therefore, my heart is really on the right side. My heart is there for you. And therefore, my heart is on the right side because it's on your right side when you are facing me. because my heart is there for you. That is the way we should be thinking. It may be that it's not something that overnight we can accomplish and achieve, but it's something that we can certainly think about aiming for, dreaming for, becoming one nation, really becoming one entity. Es achai anochi mavakesh. As Joseph said those immortal words when he was searching for his brothers. It wasn't a physical search. It is to search and find understanding, to find a way to love and to respect people that are different for ourselves. Anyone can say that they love somebody who's the same as them, who has the same interests, the same hobbies, the same personality. The challenge is, as we all know, when we have people that irritate us, that rub us the wrong way, that maybe annoy us, that are very different to us, have different interests, different traditions, different philosophies, are we still able to find that common ground? And without wanting to labor the point, because it is late and I'm going to end here, but if we look at some of the greatest Jewish leaders in our history, they are people that made no distinction between the color of the couple, with a couple, without a couple, religious, irreligious, left or right. There are people out there like Rav Grossman, for example, in Israel, and many, many others that have made it their life's work to shower love towards other people, other Jews. And I believe strongly and passionately that if that is something that we are able to do, then we say, Kamayim ponim el ponim kein lev ha'adam. It's a mirror image, it's a symmetry. What you put in, you get out. And people read between the lines. If we are able to love others, that love will be mirrored by others. Please God, we'll be able to shower our love and devotion, care and concern and respect and understanding towards other people that are different to ourselves, to love another Jew with all our heart, to give our heart to them and then to give their heart to us. And in that way, please God, as we say in davening, that the day of, and we say in our statements of our sages, that the day of Tisha B'Av will be transformed from a day of sorrow to a day of simcha, a day of joy and happiness. May it come speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you for listening.